After 70 days of grueling back and forth fighting, the Fallout War has finally ended. This was one of the longest, bloodiest, and most nuclear wars Foxhole has ever seen. Let's take a look to how it unfolded and how it came to its explosive conclusion. The war began on June 16, 2005 with 7 neutral victory points up for grabs. This was the most neutral territories we've ever seen at a war start. The Colonials wasted no time and captured the capital cities of Fairnet Coast, Lockmore, Deadlands, Marbin Hollow, and the Claustra, while the Wardens captured the capital cities of King's Cage and Endless Shore. That put the opening score at 20 out of 32 for the Colonials and 19 out of 32 for the Wardens. Over to the west, in Fisherman's Row, the Warden Regiment's 6th, Warden Navy, and Scum launched an early offensive, seizing most of the bases and essentially securing the island region. Meanwhile, in King's Cage, Wardens and Colonials clashed in the southern sector, a fight that would drag on for 27 days before any real shift occurred. The Deadlands also fell to the Colonials on day 1, and the Wardens wouldn't return there until 42 days later. Marbin Hollow became another Colonial stronghold early on, with the Wardens forced back to their last base in Mox, located on the northeast edge of the region. The road between Mox and Oster Wall would go on to be one of the most brutal fronts of the entire war, seeing endless fighting and ultimately racking up over 900,000 deaths, making it the second deadliest region of the war. In the Claustra, the Colonials dug into the capital city, the Treasury, and would hold firm there for the next 19 days. By day 2, the Wardens made a counterattack in Fairnet Coast, retaking the capital city of Jade Cove, and shifting the score to 18 for the Wardens and 19 for the Colonials. From there, they pressed south toward Victa, setting the stage for another drawn-out fight. The road between Jade Cove and Victa would be contested for the next 19 days, and by the end, Fairnet Coast would be the third deadliest region of the war, with nearly 800,000 deaths. On day 3, the Colonials launched their invasion into Callahan's Passage. This region would go down in history as the longest contested battlefield Foxhole has ever seen, and it would set a grim record with more than 1.1 million casualties, the highest death toll ever recorded in a single region. On day 4 and 5 of the war, no territories exchanged hands as both factions dug into their positions. You may see going forward that I skip a few days of this war. That's intentional, as nothing worth noting happened on those days. By the 6th day of the war, both factions had unlocked rocket artillery. From this point forward, fire rockets rained down almost non-stop. Defenses were constantly set ablaze and rebuilt, only to be burned down again in an endless cycle. Despite this chaos, no significant territories changed hands. The following day, the Wardens completed their conquest of Fisherman's Row, driving the Colonials off the island entirely. With the region secured, they began prepping for naval operations into Stemma Landing. It was also around this time that the total casualties for the war surged past 1 million. On the 8th day, a strange glitch struck the war effort. Players and vehicles began falling into what became known as the Void, halting progress across multiple fronts. Luckily, the devs were able to patch up this issue on the very same day, allowing the war to grind forward once more. Day 9 saw the conclusion of the famous bridge battle between Tomb of the First and Mercy's Wish. In most wars, this fight drags on for weeks, but this time the Colonials launched a massive infantry push backed by waves of fire rockets. Mercy's Wish fell quickly, forcing the Wardens to retreat back to the Linn of Mercy. For the first 10 days of the war, the front lines had settled into familiar patterns. The Colonials had locked down Lockmore and secured the Deadlands, and pushed deep into Callahan's Passage. The score stood at 19 for the Colonials and 18 for the Wardens. Marbin Hollow remained a blood-soaked stalemate, with neither side making meaningful progress. At the Battle of Mox and Oster Walls, this is what one Warden player had to say about the fight. In Marbin Hollow, the Colonials have been going back and forth with little progress made. It seems like every day they shoot artillery and we repair, then we shoot our artillery and they repair. I've been near the Oster Wall relic base for who knows how long. I'm new to this war, but I'm still enjoying building and digging trenches." End quote. On the 11th day of the war, the Wardens seized control of Tempest Island. From there, they repeatedly tried to break into the Fingers, but every assault failed. The Free State of the Fingers held strong for the entire war, and the Wardens were unable to capture the region. For several days afterward, from day 12 through 14, the front lines remained largely unchanged, but on the 13th day, casualties had already climbed past 2 million. On the 15th day, larger naval ships were unlocked. The Wardens began constructing fleets and launching invasions into Stemma Landing. It took several failed attempts, but eventually they were able to secure a foothold. That same day marked a breakthrough on land as well. After weeks of deadlock, the Wardens finally broke the stalemate at Oster Wall, pushing the Colonials back toward the capital city of Maiden's Vale. During day 17, the Wardens captured all of Endless Shore, driving the Colonials out entirely. At the time, the Wardens didn't know it, but this would be as far south as they would go. They would never manage to break into Reaver's Pass, and this line would become their limit for the rest of the war. However, on day 18, the Colonials struck back, waves of tanks poured into Endless Shore, and after a massive counter-offensive they captured Saltbrook. This was the first victory point shift since the beginning of the war, giving the Colonials a score of 20 while the Wardens dropped to 17. And the Colonials didn't stop there. By the end of the day, the Wardens had been driven entirely out of Endless Shore. In the Claustra, the Colonials continued their momentum, pushing the Wardens back towards Weathered Expanse on the 19th day. Over the next 42 days, the front would remain bitterly contested. The Wardens would manage to hold Weathered Expanse, but the towns of 3rd Chapter and the Vault in the Claustra changed hands repeatedly as the two sides fought in an endless cycle of attacks and counterattacks. By the 20th day of the war, casualties had already surpassed 3 million. The only major changes from the very start of the war were the Colonials' control over Endless Shore and the Claustra. All other fronts remained relatively the same. On the 21st day of the war, the Wardens launched relentless waves of infantry, tanks, and fire rockets against Victa. After days of pressure, they finally broke through, shattering the Colonial defenses, and finally drove them out of Farinac Coast, forcing them to retreat back towards Westgate. Meanwhile, in Marbin Hollow, the Colonials retook Oster Wall, reigniting the bitter back and forth between it and Mox. For the next 12 days, this stretch of road would once again be a killing field, with little territory gained by either side. During the 22nd and 23rd day, the Wardens attempted multiple large-scale naval invasions into Stemma Landing, but each one ended in failure. Then, on the 24th day, after steadily losing ground for more than a week, the Wardens rallied for a massive counteroffensive. The push brought new energy and morale to the faction. They reclaimed Saltbrook and Endless Shore, restoring the victory point balance to where it had stood at the start of the war. 19 for the Colonials and 18 for the Wardens. This is what one Warden player had to say about that day. "It was so fun. I joined the game on Wednesday, so it was an absolute blast being able to take part in my first operation." End quote. Over in the Western Islands, after persistency finally paid off, and after 3 failed naval invasions, the Wardens finally had a successful invasion and secured Stemma Landing, and took control of almost all the island regions, leaving only the Fingers as the last Colonial-controlled island on the map. This is what one player had to say about the last invasion into Stemma Landing. "The Colonials had no idea we were coming. We came with a long hook and hit hard and fast. The town base was down in a few minutes as the long hook unloaded its crew and took the town hall." End quote. On the 25th day of the war, nukes were unlocked for both factions. Launch pads could now be constructed, and the race to assemble the first weapon of mass destruction had begun. From this point forward, the war changed completely. By the 27th day, the Wardens had managed to secure all of King's Cage, and even pushed briefly into Sableport, but this would mark the farthest advance south they would achieve in this lane. During day 28, the Warden hold on Endless Shore collapsed. The Colonials stormed Saltbrook once more, driving the Wardens not only out of the city, but out of the entire region once again. By this day, the death toll for both factions has surged past 4 million. Towards the end of the day, the Colonials became the first faction to complete a nuke site, establishing it in Westgate. To counter the looming threat, the Wardens set up a bounty system. Anyone who succeeded in destroying the Colonial nuke would be rewarded with resources and vehicles to use as they pleased. For the 30-day recap, only a few major territorial changes had occurred since day 20. The Wardens secured all of Farinac Coast, while the Colonials held Endless Shore. On every other front, the lines barely shifted. In Callahan's Passage, territories continued to swap hands constantly, with bases changing ownership daily but never being held for long. On the 31st day, the first nuke of the war was launched. Fired from Westgate, the Colonials' warhead struck the Warden capital of King's Cage, obliterating the Manacle. This explosion decreased the total victory points needed to 31, putting the Colonials at 20 out of 31 victory points, and 16 out of 31 for the Wardens. For the next 17 days, fighting raged in the northern part of King's Cage without any decisive changes in the lines. Unfortunately, the bounty on the Warden side for destroying the nuke was never claimed. The organizer of the event said that everyone had a lot of fun making attempts to kill it, and will probably do more things like this in the future. And with the first nuke launched on this day, it set the tone for the rest of the war. None of us could have predicted what was coming. By the end, 18 more nukes would be detonated. The primary targets were capital cities and towns with storage depots, which devastated the supply lines. Logistics became one of the hardest jobs this war, with many Logi players later describing it as one of the most grueling experiences they had ever faced. With much of the central map reduced to radioactive ruins, there were few safe places to drop off crates for storage or for staging operations. Keeping the front lines supplied became a nearly impossible challenge. By the 33rd day of the war, the Colonials finally achieved a breakthrough in Marbin Hollow. After weeks of grinding combat along the short road between Mox and Oster Wall, they managed to seize Mox itself, pushing the Wardens out of the region entirely. The capture was a massive morale boost for the Colonials, who had been locked in that brutal fight since the opening hours of the war. To the east and Stilken Shelf, the Colonials also made gains, pushing deep into the southern half of the region. During day 34, the Colonials pressed their advantage in the Lynn of Mercy, capturing the capital city of Ulster Falls and shifting the score to 21 for the Colonials and 15 for the Wardens. For the next 6 days, however, Ulster Falls would change hands repeatedly, as neither faction was able to hold it for long. On the 35th day, the Colonials surrounded the port of Rhyme and Stilken Shelf. The Wardens, desperate to hold their last base in the region, threw everything they had into the defense. One Colonial player had this to say about the siege: "It was pure chaos. The Wardens were throwing every tank and shell they could at us. They hold on the port of Rhyme this time, but we would be back." End quote. During day 36, the war saw its second nuclear strike. The Wardens launched a warhead from Weathered Expanse into Marben Hollow, obliterating the colonial capital of Maiden's Vale. The blast destroyed much of the colonial supply network, allowing the Wardens to surge back into the region, retake Mox, and re-establish a foothold. The nuke shifted the score to 19 out of 30 for the Colonials and 16 out of 30 for the Wardens. That same day, the total casualties passed 5 million for both sides. By day 37, the Colonials had stabilized in Westgate. They halted the Warden advance and counterattacked into Faranet Coast to reclaim Victa, a city they had lost 16 days earlier. At the start of day 38, the third nuke was launched. It was fired from Westgate from the Colonials and it targeted the capital city of Jade Cove. The nuke dropped the total victory points down to 29, which made the new score 19 out of 29 for the Colonials and 15 out of 29 for the Wardens. This is what one Warden player had to say in the final minutes of Jade Cove. The Colonials had spent the whole war trying and failing to take the ramp. As the nuke timer ticked down, the Wardens put up a fierce defense at the ramp, but us Wardens knew that it was all in vain. We held firm even with 2 minutes left before it hit. I led the Wardens in a glorious bayonet charge to show the Colonials we would never back down, but still the city was nuked. I just want to say good fight to the Colonials." End quote. Even as Jade Cove burned, the Wardens launched a massive counterattack to the east. A wave of tanks rolled into Stilken Shelf, and they overwhelmed the Colonials and drove them out of the region. By day 40, 3 nukes had already been detonated, with the score holding at 19 for the Colonials and 15 for the Wardens. The only major fight during these days continued to be Ulster Falls in the Lynn of Mercy, a capital city that continued to exchange hands constantly without a decisive winner. On day 42, the fourth nuke was launched. This time the Wardens launched from Weathered Expanse, obliterating the colonial capital, the treasury, in the Claustra. The score shifted once again to 18 out of 28 for the Colonials and 15 out of 28 for the Wardens. That same day, the Wardens achieved another milestone. For the first time since day 1, they pushed the Colonials out of Callahan's Passage and back into the Deadlands. Though their invasion into the Deadlands wouldn't last long, their momentum from the previous day carried into the next day on day 43, as the Wardens drove the Colonials even further back into Lockmore, a region the Wardens hadn't touched since day 9 of the war. But this resurgence was short-lived. Within the next 4 days, the Colonials rallied and pushed them back once more, forcing the Wardens to retreat toward the Lynn of Mercy once again, and to never return to Lockmore for the rest of the war. By day 44, the Wardens had taken nearly all of Marben Hollow, leaving only the city of Lockheed in Colonial hands. Lockheed has always been notoriously difficult to capture because of its long bridge approach, but even this natural defense wouldn't save it from what was coming later this war. Towards the end of this day, the total casualties for the war would hit 6 million for both sides. During day 46, the Wardens captured Saltbrook and Endless Shore for the third time. This would prove to be the final time the city ever changed hands during this war. Also on this day, Colonials would begin construction of 4 separate nuke sites across the map, setting the stage to turn the front lines into a complete wasteland. On day 47, the Wardens managed to reclaim Victa once more, and launched one last desperate push into Westgate, but the offensive faltered and the advance failed. During day 48, the 5th nuke of the war was launched by the Colonials from the Drowned Vale, striking Foxcatcher and Weathered Expanse. Foxcatcher was a key refinery town, and with its destruction, the Wardens lost one of their most important resource hubs along the midline. This would weaken their ability to supply and defend the surrounding regions. That same day, the 6th nuke of the war struck the western front. Fired from Sableport, it landed on King's Cage in the Bali. The town's storage depot was one of the few Warden supply depots in the area. With it gone, the Colonials gained a much easier path to attack the northern part of the region. On day 49, the 7th nuke was launched, this time on Ulster Falls, the capital of the Lynn of Mercy. The city was completely destroyed, putting the score at 18 out of 27 for the Colonials and 14 out of 27 for the Wardens. Out of the devastation, one Warden soldier survived. His name was Otto. His survival became legendary. Various Warden groups formed cults around him, hailing him as their leader. Somehow, Otto's story reignited Warden morale and gave their faction renewed energy. For the next 12 days, both factions would clash fiercely along the northern side of the Lynn of Mercy. Meanwhile, to the west, the Colonials pushed the Wardens out of Westgate and back into Faranet Coast for the final time. The Wardens would never return to Westgate for the rest of the war. By day 50, a total of 7 nukes had already been dropped, tying the record for most nukes in a single war. The fiercest front was the ongoing Colonial assault in Stilcan Shelf. After weeks of battering against a massive underground fortress, the Colonials finally broke through and began pushing deeper into the region. This is what one Colonial player had to say about that battle. "It feels like this war will never end." Another nuke was launched, another 4 launching soon. "At the moment, I have spent a lot of my time in Stilcan Shelf today. We fought up to the underground bunker. Wave after wave of Wardens we fought. Wave after wave they were cut down. And wave after wave of brave Colonial men and women died during our Hydra rush. Until eventually we forced it to fall, forcing the Wardens back even more, forcing them to retreat further into the city." End quote. Also on this day, the 8th nuke was dropped. It was sent from the Colonials in Allode's Bight to Stilcan Shelf and destroyed the city of Vulpine Watch. Another storage depot town was wiped off the map, cutting off most Warden supplies in the west. The Colonials then secured the entire western side of the region soon after. On day 51, the 9th nuke detonated. It was launched from Westgate against the relic base Terra in Farinac Coast. While Terra wasn't a victory point or a supply hub, the nuke was fired to prevent the Wardens from launching their own nuke. The Colonials also destroyed a second Warden nuke site in the region when their massive railstorm cannon Gran reduced it to rubble. Losing 2 nuke sites in a single day was a crushing blow to the Wardens. Morale plummeted and the Colonials' nuclear dominance seemed unstoppable. On day 52, the 10th nuke fell. Fired from the Deadlands, it struck the capital city of Callahan's Passage. This blast shattered Warden defenses and opened the door for the Colonials to re-enter the region after 11 days of heavy fighting to keep them contained in the Deadlands. The score now stood at 18 out of 26 for the Colonials and 13 out of 26 for the Wardens. During day 53, the Wardens launched another counterattack, pushing back in several regions including Farinac Coast, Lynn of Mercy, Callahan's Passage, Marbin Hollow, and Stilcan Shelf. They also destroyed a Colonial nuke site in Lockmore that had been targeting Fading Light, an important refinery town in Stonecradle. That same day, the war's total casualties would pass 7 million. On day 54, the Wardens fired the 11th nuke of the war, launching from Callahan's Passage into the Deadlands and obliterating the capital city of Abandoned Ward. The blast wiped out critical infrastructure including a storage depot, a factory, and a garage, and it updated the score to 17 out of 25 for the Colonials and 13 out of 25 for the Wardens. The very next day, on day 55, the nukes continued to rain down. The 12th nuke fell. This time the Colonial forces sent it from King's Cage into Stonecradle, destroying the capital city of Buckler Sound. The score shifted again to 17 out of 24 for the Colonials and 12 out of 24 for the Wardens. With Buckler Sound destroyed, this would open up the region for the Colonials to advance further north, and despite the near daily nuclear strikes, most of the other front lines barely moved. On day 56, the war officially became the longest in Foxhole's history, and this is what one player had to say about the war. "Looks like the Forever War is going to break records for longest war, most nukes, and most deaths. Great job to both factions for making this a historic war." End quote. No major shifts in territory occurred on this day. Most fronts were focused on evacuating supplies from seaports and storage depots before the nukes landed. During day 57, the Colonials launched the 13th nuke, firing from Endless Shore into Stilcan Shelf to destroy the capital city of Port of Rhyme. This brought the score to 17 out of 23 for the Colonials and 11 out of 23 for the Wardens. The Colonials attempted to press their advantage into Morgan's Crossing, but the Wardens would hold them back for the remainder of the war. That same day in Stilcan Shelf, nearly the entire region had been reduced to neutral territory, with only a single Warden base still standing. On day 58, for the first time in nearly 2 weeks, no nukes were launched or planned. For at least one day, the war would once again be fought with tanks and rifles instead of nuclear fire. Day 59 saw a major shift on the Western Front. After nearly the entire war being fought over Farinac Coast, the Colonials finally forced the Wardens out of the region and back into Nevish Line. The Wardens would never return to Farinac for the rest of the war. By the end, the region would stand as the 3rd deadliest battlefield with over 783,000 deaths. That same day, a story surfaced on Reddit from a Colonial player named Clickbait, who delivered an incredible 1,000 crates of B-mats to Brackish Point in Endless Shore. Armed with only a flatbed, the run took roughly 70 trips from Terminus, and it amounted to 100,000 B-mats uncrated. This massive logistical effort helped fuel the Colonial push forward. The player had this to say about their experience: "I wanted to see if I could cook and deliver before the Warden weekend, so I released it on Saturday. Never again. Next time, train." End quote. On day 60, we saw the return of nukes. Within minutes of each other, the Colonials dropped 2 warheads in Marbin Hollow, one striking Mox and the other Oster Wall. The back and forth struggle over these bases had dragged on long enough, and the Colonials ended it in fire. The Battle of Mox and Oster Wall would go down as one of Marbin Hollow's legendary fights. By this point, the war had surpassed 7.6 million total casualties, overtaking War 117's casualties to become the deadliest war in Foxhole history. And as of this day, the nuke total reached 15 launched, 12 by the Colonials and 3 by the Wardens. On day 61, the Colonials unleashed the 16th nuke, striking from the Deadlands into Callahan's Passage. They destroyed Solace Gorge and its last remaining storage depot in the region. By now, many storage depots across the midline had been reduced to ash, and logistics teams were struggling under immense strain to keep the fronts supplied. Day 62 turned into a cascade of Colonial victories. After nearly a week of heavy fighting, they finally drove the Wardens out of Stone Cradle, pushing them north toward Callum's Cape, a vital logistics hub. The Lynn of Mercy also fell permanently into Colonial hands, with the Wardens never returning, and to the east the Colonials swept through the Claustra, forcing the Wardens back into Weathered Expanse, which was another permanent loss for the Wardens. Later that day, the Wardens answered back with the 17th nuke of the war, destroying Lockheed and Marvin Hollow. This strike eliminated the region's final storage depot, and with 4 nukes in total, Marvin Hollow set the record for most nuclear strikes on a single region. From this point forward, it would become a wasteland. As the day closed, the Colonials smashed through the Nevish line, capturing the capital city of the Scrying Belt in a single day's push. It was the first victory point that was taken by tanks and guns in weeks, breaking the nuclear stalemate. The war score shifted once again, bringing the Colonials to 18 out of 23, and the Wardens down to 10 out of 23. During day 63, the Colonials began their push into the moors. One Warden base in Gravekeeper's Holdfast held out and would continue to stand until the end of the war. To the east, the Colonials advanced through Weathered Expanse and captured the capital city of Weathering Halls, shifting the score to 19 out of 23 for the Colonials and 9 out of 23 for the Wardens. That same day, total casualties for both factions surpassed 8 million. On day 64, the Colonials launched a massive counteroffensive in Stemma Landing and Fisherman's Row, securing both island regions. It had been 39 days since they controlled Stemma Landing, and 58 days since they last held Fisherman's Row. Day 65 saw the siege of Callum's Cape intensify. The Wardens held firm, but the Colonials continued pressing from both the south and west. Several Warden ships attempted to flee the region towards the islands, but were intercepted and destroyed. After 6 straight days of pressure, the Colonials finally seized Callum's Cape on day 66 and pushed into Speaking Woods. That same day, the Colonials dropped the 18th nuke of the war on the capital city of Kirknell in Viper's Pit, lowering the score to 19 out of 22 for the Colonials and 8 out of 22 for the Wardens. Using the explosion as momentum, the Colonials made major gains in Viper's Pit and opened the way into Clans Head and Howell County. Meanwhile, in the eastern islands, the Colonials reclaimed Tempest Island after 55 days of Warden control. They then pushed their navy north into Godscroft, securing it the following day. Orebreaker over in the west remained the only island the Colonials never captured, and it ended the war with the fewest casualties of any region, with just 2,800 total deaths. Near the end of day 66, the Wardens launched the final nuke of the war, the 19th overall, from Morgan's Crossing to Breakertown and Stillcan Shelf, destroying the last storage depot in the region. In total, 19 nukes were fired during this war, a record unlikely to be broken anytime soon. On day 67, the Colonials forced the Wardens out of Callahan's Passage for good. The two factions had fought over this region for more than 60 days, leaving it with the highest death toll of any single region at 1.1 million casualties. This is what one Warden player had to say about their experience in Callahan's Passage. I want to thank 11E, 7ABR, GG, 300 and other clans for playing and helping CPass. It was a fight I've never seen before in Foxhole. It was more than 60 days in a hexagon defending against massive Colonial invasions. Several times we lost ground, but we always recovered with counteroffensives. There were several joint operations, even some against Deadlands, thanks to the Colonials who also made the stop become insane. See you in the next war." End quote. The Wardens on this day would attempt a desperate counteroffensive, striking Weathered Expanse. They would launch a naval invasion on the western side of the capital city. These attacks would continue until the very end of the war. With just 2 points left to secure victory, the Colonials focused on Speaking Woods, the Moors, Reaching Trail, and Clans Head Valley. By the end of this day, the capital city of the Moors would fall, pushing the score to 21 out of 22 for the Colonials with only 1 victory point remaining. The entire region of the Moors would collapse, except for one last base at Gravekeeper's Holdfast, which refused to fall. This is what one player had to say from that fight. "Gravekeeper's Holdfast is still holding strong after receiving a massive amount of punishment, while also being completely encircled. We are still holding even though all Logi ways have been cut. Even the 4 Railstorm cannons and 8 150mm artillery pieces aren't a match for the bunker." End quote. On day 68, 1898, the Wardens made their final stands in 3 key cities: Tyne and Speaking Woods, Brodytown and Reaching Trail, and the King and Clan's Head Valley. Each city showed remarkable resilience, holding firm throughout the day. This is what one Colonial player had to say about the fight for Brodytown. Fighting in Brodytown was rough today. Wardens shelling our town hall several times, our own rail cannon firing back, tanks pushing and dying, but it was all for nothing. The Wardens hold firm still, the Colonial side not daring to give up an inch as we fight for the final victory push." End quote. And finally, after several days of being surrounded, Gravekeeper's holdfast in the moors would finally fall on this day. This is what one player had to say about the battle. "So proud of 101 DB. You guys not only built the best, most effective fortress I've ever encountered, but the way you prepared it and defended it was remarkable. Not only did you divert a very significant amount of collie material and logistics away from the front, you and your allies' defense made rubble of many Colonial assets." End quote. Day 69 saw the battles continue in Tyne, Brodytown, and the King. In a surprising turn of events, the Wardens managed to push back into Weathered Expanse and retake the capital city of Weathering Halls, forcing the Colonials back to needing 2 more victory points. The Wardens held Weathering Halls for most of the day, but by the end of the day it fell once again, bringing the Colonials back to needing just one final victory point. At this point, everything hinged on which of the 3 Warden capitals would fall first. On the final day, Day 70, the war would not last much longer. The 3 Warden capital cities clung desperately to life, but after 5 hours of brutal fighting, Brodytown and Reaching Trail fell. With its collapse, the longest, deadliest, and most nuclear war in Foxhole history came to an end. Overall, War 126, the Fallout War, is one we will never forget. This is what one player had to say about the war. "It was in essence our vision of the Great War. While there will be others, War 126 will be special to everyone who is a veteran of it. It was brutal, long, and hard fought by both sides." End quote. GG's to both sides that fought during this great battle, and GG's to the Colonials on your victory. I will be making a Patreon/Ko-Fi video about my honest opinions of how this war went, and how I really feel about it. I appreciate any support as it takes me a lot of time to research and make these war summaries. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you all in War 127. Cheers.